Prophet of Allah? I replied, and upon you peace, O father of Hassan and the commander of the faithful. He then said, Fatima, I smell a sweet fragrance like that of my brother, my cousin, the Prophet of Allah. I replied, yes, he is underneath the cloak with your two sons. So Ali went near the cloak and said, Peace be on you, Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you? He replied, and upon you peace, my brother, my legatee, my successor, and my standard bearer. You are given the permission to enter. So Ali entered the cloak with them. Then I stepped forward and said, Peace be on you, my father, O Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you? He replied, and upon you peace, my daughter, O part of myself. You are given the permission to enter. So I entered the cloak with them. Getting together underneath the cloak, my father, the Prophet of Allah, held the two ends of the cloak and raised his right hand towards the heaven and prayed, O Allah, these are the people of my household, Ahlul Bayt. They are my confidence and my supporters. Their flesh is my flesh and their blood is my blood. Whoever hurts them hurts me too. Whoever displeases them displeased me too. I'm at war with them I'm at war with those at war with them. I'm at peace with those at peace with them. I'm the enemy of their enemies and I'm the friend of their friends. They are from me and I am from them. O Allah, bestow your blessings, benevolence, forgiveness, and pleasure upon me and upon them. And keep away impurity from them and keep them thoroughly pure. Then the Lord Almighty Allah said, O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas, and the sailing ships, but for the love of these five lying underneath the cloak. Jibreel, the trusted angel, asked, Who are under the cloak? The Almighty answered, They are the household of the Prophet and the assets of prophethood. They are Fatima, her father, her husband, and her two sons. Jibreel said, O Lord, may I fly to earth to be the sixth of them? Allah replied, Yes, you are given the permission. Jibreel the trusted landed near them and said, Peace be on you, O Prophet of Allah. The All-Highest conveys his peace on you and his greetings and says, By my honor and glory, O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas, and the sailing ships, but for your sake and love. God has given me permission to enter the cloak with you. May I join you, O Prophet of Allah? The Prophet replied, And peace be on you, O trusted bearer of Allah's revelations. You are granted the permission. So Jibreel entered the cloak with us and said to my father, Allah sent his revelations to you. Verily Allah's desire is to keep away blemish from you, and O people of household Ahlul Bayt, and purify you with the perfect purification. Then Ali said to my father, O Prophet of Allah, tell me what significance has Allah given for getting underneath this cloak? The Prophet replied, By him who rightfully appointed me a prophet and chose me a messenger for the salvation of the mankind. Whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mention this event, Allah will bestow on them His blessings and mercy. Angels will encircle them, asking Allah the remission of their sins until the assembly disperse. So Ali said, Verily by the Lord of Kaaba, We and our followers are the winners. Then my father replied, by him who rightfully appointed me a prophet and chose me a messenger for the salvation of the mankind. Whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mention this event, there shall remain none grieved, but Allah will remove his grief. There shall remain none distressed, but Allah will dispel his distress. There shall remain none wish-seeker, but Allah will grant his wish. Ali happily said, verily by the Lord of the Kaaba, we and our followers are the winners in this and the blessed in this world and the next.
Thank you, brother. We'd now like to invite Sheikh Bilal to please come take the minbar. Please welcome him with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهد الله عليه، فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. صلى على محمد وآل. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat to hasten the master of our time, Sahibul Asri wa Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the first part of our discussion, on discussing from the various topics of fiqh, we're going to change gears a little bit today. We've been talking about masail relating to salat, but there's another mas'ala that I wanted to mention today. When we talk about food additives and food products, food additives can come from many sources. Famously, there is some food additives that are actually made by crushed up bugs. Namely, there's a bug called cochineal, Cochineal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, that's why I'm telling you the spelling. Cochineal is a insect that's associated with Central and South America that is crushed up and is used to produce a red color dye. Now, this red dye is used in food additives and sometimes is called carmine, carminic acid, E120, natural red number 4, or cochineal. And these names that are given to it describe that it is an additive, and it should be known from these numbers and information that this is an additive made from a crushed up insect. The question is, are we allowed to consume crushed up insects? Now understand something, an insect in itself is not najis. One of the famous things that we do is when we think of something that's haram to consume, we think of something that's najis. Because namely an animal like a goat or a sheep or a cow that is slaughtered without mentioning the name of Allah is haram to eat, and it is najis. However, there are categories of things that are haram to eat, but they are not najis. I'll give you an example. A fish that has no scales on it, like a catfish, is not najis, but you're not allowed to eat it. It doesn't have blood that gushes out, therefore it's not najis, but it's not halal to eat. The same is true with insects, with the exception of locusts. Locusts we can eat. I haven't tried them, I can't tell you what they taste like, and I don't say that you necessarily have to eat them. But just because something is halal doesn't mean you have to consume it, okay? Just to be clear about this. But with the exception of locusts, bugs are haram to consume, but they're not najis. So the question now comes that this cochineal that they use to create the color red, is it halal or haram for us to consume? And the answer from Sayyid Sistani Hafidhullah is that this item is not halal for us to consume, with two exceptions. The first exception is to say that the amount of this insect that's included in the food that's made is so small that it dissolves entirely into the food, that it has no trace of its originality left to it. Now, this is typically described as an ingredient that is 2% or less. That typically an ingredient that is completely dissolved into the material that's being made is less than 2% of the quantity that we can say that if this item is present in here, then it should still be okay to eat, and that it's not something that would be haram for us to consume by its presence, because the quantity is so small, it's as if it's not there. The same way, for example, we talked about yesterday the idea that eating dust is haram. However, let's say I have a cup of water sitting here on the table, which close enough, and some dust, like in parts of this world there are sandstorms, some dust gathers and falls into here. Now, if the water becomes overcome by that dust, and you can see the dust in it, we would say that this water now, because it has dust in it, is haram. But if, for example, a small amount goes in there, like 1% or less than 1% or 2%, something minute goes in there where maybe I can taste something, but I can't really taste something, maybe it's there, maybe it's not there, it's still fine. Sayyid Sistani says that it's okay in this situation that if one to consume it, if it was less than 2%, a very minute portion of this is something that's made from this cochineal, it's okay to consume. The other exception to this is very interesting. The other exception to this is to say that a mu'min does not have the obligation to search and see if this object is in his food or not. And if I've ever consumed something and I've never paid attention to this and I happen to consume it, it's not a sin. But if, for example, I read the label and I see it says red natural, because they use natural, right, because it's made from insects, so it's considered natural. Natural red 4. And I know what natural red 4 is. It's made of bugs, and then I say, that's going to be tasty, and I eat it. That's haram. That's not permissible. But if I don't know, it is not my obligation to go out and search for this information. It is not my obligation to turn over the package and look at this information. Now let me explain something. There's a difference between meat and something like this. When it comes to meat and lahm that has to have the name of Allah taken on it, chicken, meat, whatever that is, everything is haram until I'm sure that it's halal. Once I have certainty it's halal, then I put it in my mouth. But in the case of, for example, like a candy bar, for example, because that's where actually this cochineal is used a lot in sweets. So in candy bars and sweets, they'll use this as a coloring. And a candy bar by itself is not a meat byproduct. You don't expect, for there to be beef in a Snickers bar. So as a consequence, it's not a question of looking at and seeing is this object halal from the aspect of is there meat in it. It's a question of is there a problem with taharat and najasat in this item. And as we mentioned, the rule in Islam is everything is tahir for you unless if there's a reason to believe that it's not. So naturally, we don't have an obligation to look for this item to see that, oh, is it in there? But if I come to know of this information and I know that it's in there, then I can't ignore that information. I can't pretend like I don't know. So once I know, then I have an obligation to follow. Now, I'll give you some good news. Most places aren't using this ingredient anymore. Many of them are doing away with it. And the reason they're doing away with it for exactly the reason that you and I don't want to eat cochineal, most people don't want to eat cochineal. They don't want to eat insects. So more and more manufacturers are getting away from it. It's not as common as it used to be. It's something that's fewer and far between, but it's something better to avoid. And in general, the consumption of insects this is leading into this mas'ala here, is haram. We don't eat them except for locusts. Now, to elaborate what that may be as an example, I have a jar of honey. An ant climbs into that jar of honey. Now, one of three things typically happen, and one of them is right and two of them are wrong. One person sees an ant, goes in, says, ew, ant, throws the whole thing out. Another person sees an ant, goes in, says, ant, and eats it. The third thing that's the right solution is that what we do is that amount that the ant is in, we take that out and we throw it out because that ant is not halal to eat, we can't eat it. But the rest of the honey is fine because the ant is not najis. And the rest of the honey is fine to use. And again, honey being having a high viscosity, meaning it's very thick and dense, the najasa, if there was, and you wouldn't transfer from one portion to another, and we can simply take this piece out, throw it out, and the rest of the honey we can eat. So in this way, insects, just to specify, are not permissible to consume. It's not something that we should eat. If an insect lands on something, we should remove that portion, and the rest of it is still clean for us to eat. They are not najis, but they are not halal. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In our discussion, in our main discussion for the night, we've been talking about the past few nights some of the secret, what I call again, the secrets of Karbala. In understanding what I mean by this is some of the messages that though they are apparent within the event of Karbala, that maybe we haven't really spent the time to ponder over them and understand why, what, and how these events occurred and what their significance is to us. And the one I want to address tonight looks at history a little bit because the question is, why did Imam Hussein have to fight? Now, this is interesting, right? The reason I say it's interesting is that we've been hearing all our lives that Imam Hussein saved the religion of his grandfather, saved the religion of Islam. If someone was to ask you how, could you explain it? And that's the interesting point, is that can we explain these points in the history of Islam, that if someone was to look at them critically and ask us about our ideology, can we discuss them? Now let me explain. It's not wajib upon you to defend Islam in front of everyone and answer every question that comes at you about your religion. But as an educated minority, and we are a highly educated minority. As a matter of fact, in the world, Americans in general consume, as 5% of the world population, consume 20% of the world's resources. And us being the Shia in this land, we are amongst the best educated Shia with the most resources in the history of the world. That's who we are. Those are the blessings that we have. Those are the things that we will have to answer for, that we had better than everyone. What did we do with it? What did we do with our life? What did we do with this purpose? In that light, that I have access to knowledge, information, resources, education, I should spend some time to dedicate myself to learn about the religion of Allah. I should be able to answer some questions and think intellectually about my faith. The intellect is not just for math and science and my job. It's my faith, my ideology. And the beauty of Islam is that there's nothing in Islam that goes against the intellect. It's just a question of, have we spent the time to research and learn and understand, what does my faith tell me and why does it tell me what it tells me? So tonight's conversation looks a little bit of history at 3 points in history that reflect upon the need for Imam Hussein to fight and what was the consequence of Imam Hussein's ability to fight. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first of these points that talks about why this was a needed event to happen in the history of Islam looks immediately after the Shahadat of the Holy Prophet. That after the death of the Holy Prophet, we see that in Islam as a whole, there is a split, a schism. One that talks about the religious authority and authority going to Imam Ali, and the other talking about the Khulafa. The Khulafa's interest in the authority of Islam, to be very clear, was because of the uniqueness of Islam. Islam that our Prophet brought was not just a religion, it was also a government. And the Islam that our Prophet established was both a religion, a way of life, as well as a government. And the aspect of Islam being a government was something unique and special. Understand something, Arabia as a peninsula, as a piece of land, had the Persian Empire on one side and the Roman Empire on the other side. Yet neither conquered Arabia. Why? Because the deserts prevented these armies that lived in fertile lands from entering into Arabia. So Arabia was like the Wild West. No one had ever conquered it, and as a consequence, the people were proud, independent people who lived in tribes and weren't even organized. The land of Arabia never had a central government until Allah sent Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The miracles of Rahmatul lil Alameen, the miracle of the mercy of mankind. One of the questions that we sometimes ask was, why was this prophet sent to Arabia? And the conversation is much longer about why he was sent to Arabia. But one of the things was that in the darkness of the most ignorant people that existed on land that no one could control, came this one light of Risalat where no other prophet had established before since Ismail, and he came and he changed this land and reformed it, educated them and brought them government. The miracles of our Prophet, don't just imagine it was one Quran. No, the entire system of reformation that existed, what he took these people from their darkness and made them, was a miracle of our Prophet. And some people had a hunger and interest in this miracle, that this land, this kingdom had never existed before. And now all of a sudden, at the death of the Prophet, it's going to be given to a child. In the eyes of the Arab, the traditions and the cultures of their backward nations before the advent of Islam, age was the primary criteria for having authority. That's how you ran the tribe. You were old enough. Rasulullah reformed the entire land, built a government, and gave them new instruction to say that no, governmental authority is tied to religious authority, and it doesn't matter about the age of the person, it matters about the character of the person. But the Arabs reverted to their traditions. I said, no, this government is too valuable to put in the hands of a young man. And they usurped this government. The interest of the Khulafa initially was not the interest of being the religious authority over the people, because they themselves knew that as a religious authority, there were others who were more qualified. There were others who had dedicated their lives to the religion of Islam, and they had come much later to the religion of Islam. Their interest was, let's take this political authority. But as a consequence of them being the companions of the Holy Prophet, they also deemed themselves to have religious authority. All of the companions of Rasulullah were known as mujtahideen according to these khulafa and the people of this time. Now if you notice the history of even Madhab Ja'fari, up until about 700 years ago, to say the word mujtahid and say that according to ijtihad we base our rulings in Islam, it was considered haram. And around 740 after Hijrah, in the time of Allama Hilli, suddenly became that the Madhab Ja'fari believed ijtihad is wajib. And some people look at this in history and they say, you Shias have done something strange now. But no, really what happened was that the term ijtihad, and to be a mujtahid, has two different meanings. One of these meanings was popular until the year 740, which was to derive and to base your judgment on your opinion. That my opinion is what I should use when I make a decision about the religion of Islam. And after 740, another meaning of the term ijtihad became popular, to strive and struggle in finding the resources and information to derive law. One of these, to use your opinion to make law, we said is haram, and anyone who does this has committed a sin. And the other, to strive and search from the Quran and Hadith, we said is wajib, and you have to do this. The difference was in the terminology. Now when the Khulafa and the Ashab referred to themselves as mujtahideen, they said we are entitled to our opinion to determine how Islamic law should be based, because we spent time with the Prophet, we saw him, so we know better than others to decide what the rules of Islam should be. You saw the consequence of this in events like Siffin. See, in Siffin, I said on one side you have Muawiyah Mal'un, on the other side you have Amir al-Mu'mineen. When you ask the people of that time, well, who was right, who was wrong? They say both were right. Say the bloodiest battle in the history of Islam, and you're saying both sides were right? They say yes. They're both mujtahids. They were companions of the Prophet. They're entitled to their opinion. And when they have a conflict amongst themselves, Allah will reward both of them and nothing bad will happen. This was the meaning of what they understood ijtihad to mean. And the basis of this ijtihad, this Khalifa who assigned himself to be a temporal king, suddenly had religious authority as well too. And these khulafa used this religious authority to bring changes into the religion of Islam. Now, for example, the third Khalifa, up until the advent of the third Khalifa, what would happen is when it came time for prayer, from the time of our Prophet, Bilal would stand at the door of the masjid and recite the adhan. And as he would recite the adhan at the door, people would come to the masjid and come for salat. The first Khalifa followed this. The second Khalifa followed this. The third Khalifa said, wait a minute. These towns have gotten much bigger. There's a lot more people in Medina. And if you stand on the ground in front of the masjid and you call people, not everybody can hear you as far away. He says, how about we build something and we put him on top? Initially, they put the person on top of the businesses in the market, and then they call out the call to prayers. And then eventually, we see these minare and these things were built for people to stand on, to climb up on, to announce the call to prayer. This was an innovation that was presented into the religion of Islam by the third Khalifa. The second Khalifa took many things that Rasulullah had permitted and said, I refuse to allow them. So there are three things that were allowed in the life of the Prophet that I forbid you from doing. And we see the impact of these changes today. We see that, for example, he forbade Tawaf al-Nisa. Until today, Ahl Sunnah don't perform Tawaf al-Nisa. He forbade marriage of temporary marriage, of mut'ah. He says this is haram. Until today, we see that Ahl Sunnah believe that this is a haram action. But the Prophet allowed it. Second Khalifa even admitted the Prophet allowed this. But in the Prophet's time, this was okay. I forbid you from doing this. And the third thing was that he changed the process of marriage and divorce. See, the way we perform marriage and the way it's required to be performed is that you don't need witnesses to get married. You need witnesses to get divorced. He flipped it. So that now, any nikah nama that you pick up requires two witnesses, and when it comes to divorce, they believe that a man can just yell, talaq, 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 and run away, and marriage is over. These were changes in the religion of Islam made by the khulafa. And the assumption was, and the assumption became amongst the people, that this Khalifa is both the religious authority and the governmental authority. Even when the Khalifa started to become an evil man, this tradition continued. Muawiyah did many bad things, mal'un. But still, he was considered someone who had the right to change the religion, and he did. One of the things that Muawiyah instituted was when he had 70,000 pulpits under his authority and under his khilafat, he made it mandatory that every khutbah begins with the cursing of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He went further. Till today, the impact of these changes Muawiyah made are present. When you go for Eid Salat, right, what do? We have the Salat first, and then the khutbah. Muawiyah said, this doesn't work for me. He said, listen, for Eid prayer, the Bedouins, everybody from far away comes to listen to the Eid prayers. He says, if the Salat is first, then they'll leave without listening to the khutbah, and they'll never hear the cursing of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So Muawiyah flipped it. He said, do the khutbah first, so they have to sit and listen, and then do the prayers afterwards. Till today, Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, we recite the prayer first and the khutbah afterwards, and Ahl Sunnah have the khutbah first and the prayer afterwards. These people had begun the process of taking advantage of their political authority and modifying and manipulating the religion of Islam. And it was one of the authorities invested in the Khalifa at this point in time, that when we look at history, that these khulafa all had the right to change the religion as they saw fit. The second thing that was important that was happening. Everybody's good? A little bit of history today. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There is sometimes a disparity cast upon our second Imam, Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Mujtaba alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. Let me clarify this right now. Some people hold the belief that to say that, for example, na'uzubillah, that Imam Hassan was a docile man, therefore he made peace, and Imam Hussein was an aggressive man, therefore he made war. This is a lie. An Imam's personality does not enter into the decisions that he makes for the sake of Islam. if you would take our sixth Imam and put him in the role of Imam Hussein, and you took Imam Hussein and put him in the role of the sixth Imam, both would have done exactly the same things. The actions of an Imam are not based on his personality. They're based on what the religion of Islam needs to protect and continue that religion until the Day of Judgment. So this idea, na'uzubillah, that they talk about, that the personalities of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein were different, one was passive, one was aggressive, and this is why they made different decisions, is a complete lie, a fallacy, and a disrespect to the person of the Imam, that the Imam, na'uzubillah, didn't know better that Islam needs more than what his personality can offer. It's foolishness, it's nonsense. To the extent where even our Prophet, when describing these two sons of his, he says, Hasanan imaman hadhihi al-ummah, law qama aw qa'ada. That these two sons of mine are the imams of this ummah. Whether they sit or they stand, their authority is absolute. This qama or qa'ada is whether they fight or make peace. Their authority is absolute. There is no difference to say that the status of one imam is less and the other is more. These two are one nur in two. Imam Hassan would have done what Imam Hussein did. Imam Hussein would have done what Imam Hassan did had the situation been reversed. There is no difference between them, and their azamat and their wasila for us is the same. It's something special. Imam Hassan's environment demanded the making of peace at that time. Why? If you notice the Battle of Siffin, after the Battle of Siffin, we say the Battle of Siffin was inconclusive. At the end of that battle, when Imam Ali was about to win victory in the Battle of Siffin, Muawiyah forced Imam Ali into a peace treaty by bribing the soldiers of Imam Ali. Amr ibn As had made a deal with them. He says, listen, Muawiyah will give you a lot of money if when I give you the signal, you stop Ali from fighting. I said, okay. What was the signal? Amr ibn As Mal'un raised the Quran on a spear. When he raised this Quran on a spear, the signal was given to the army of Imam Ali that, okay, this is the time to stop Ali ibn Abi Talib from fighting and Muawiyah will pay us. So they went to Imam Ali and they said, Muawiyah has asked for a treaty on the Quran. Now we have to submit to the Quran. We can't continue fighting. Imam Ali says, I have been quoting the Quran through this battle and no one has listened, and now you are insisting that because the Quran is on a spear? They said, Ali ibn Abi Talib, if you don't stop the fighting now, we'll kill you. Malik Ashtar was at the door of Muawiyah about to kill him, and the command was given by Imam Ali to come back. One of the signs of the Shia are that we submit to the authority of the Ahlul Bayt regardless of what our desire says. Malik Ashtar can see Muawiyah, I can kill him and finish this, but Imam Ali says come back. Malik Ashtar leaves everything right there and goes back to Imam Ali. Doesn't look at his own interest. That treaty then fell apart and nothing came as a conclusion. At the end of the life of Imam Ali, he was raising another army to go and fight Muawiyah again. And then they assassinated Imam Ali to stop him from raising that army. Imam Hassan now possessed this army, and in this army were some people who truly wanted to fight for Imam Hassan, and many of them didn't really want to fight for Imam Hassan. They didn't want to fight for anyone. Amongst them were those people whom Muawiyah had tricked into making a treaty. Because guess what happened? Amr ibn As said, we'll give you a lot of money if you stop Ali ibn Abi Talib from fighting. He said, okay, we'll stop Ali ibn Abi Talib. They stopped Imam Ali, they went to Muawiyah and said, give me my money. Muawiyah said, what money? He said, you promised us. He said, who are you going to go to make me give you money? Are you going to go tell Ali ibn Abi Talib, I bribed you? Is Ali going to get you your money? Who's going to believe and who's going to respect your call that you were treasonous against your Imam for this money? I don't give you anything and you have no recourse. When this happened, these people became the Khawarij. Those who said, no Ali, no Muawiyah, no anyone. We don't follow their authority, we don't follow theirs. We'll just go out, loot and pillage and take money for ourselves. The people of this ideology started to follow Imam Hassan and said, now is our chance to go back at Muawiyah. And they joined the army of Imam Hassan. Muawiyah continued to try and bribe the generals and the supporters of Imam Hassan, so that when Imam Hassan came with an army and was bringing 20,000 men, he sent 10,000 men ahead under his cousin Ubaidullah. Muawiyah bought off Ubaidullah, and many of those men deserted. Now Imam Hassan is coming with an army and he knows that he has some disloyal soldiers, he has some Khawarij, and he has some loyal soldiers. Now, if he takes this army into battle, those soldiers who are only there to kill Muawiyah, if the battle changes and Imam Hassan has to change the decision of the battle and make a difference, his own soldiers would turn against him because they weren't loyal to him to begin with. So Imam Hassan in this situation, Muawiyah sends a blank piece of paper. He says, write the treaty that you want. I'll give you whatever you want. So Imam Hassan in this situation signs a treaty with Muawiyah. This treaty is critical to the event of Karbala. Let me explain why. Everybody's good? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali. You see, up until now, we can say that the Khulafa had no religious authority. They had no rights, but they were abusing this right and making religious authority. After this treaty where Imam Hassan says that, oh Muawiyah, after you don't have the right to appoint your successor, and the Khilafat and political authority will return to me and Hussein. Now, after this treaty, at the death of Muawiyah, no one else has religious authority nor political authority to stand against the Ahlul Bayt. Had this not existed and Imam Hussein stood up to fight, he would have truly been considered a rebel, that you have no political ground, you're fighting for political authority. But the treaty of Imam Hassan established the fundamental that Imam Hussein's right was absolute, both religiously, him being the grandson and most pious man of his time, and being the one that the Khalifa previously gave the treaty that this Khilafat will return to you. So that no one could ever argue that Hussein ibn Ali stood up for power and wealth, because it was his authority to begin with that he was fighting to defend. Which brings us to the third point. Who were the people who were fighting Imam Hussein in Karbala? One of the arguments that comes is that the argument is to say that the Shia are the ones who killed Imam Hussein. What are you crying about? The argument is presented that the people of Kufa were the Shias who were fighting Imam Hussein. Not true. Shall I explain how? Let's see at our time. We have time? We have time. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muawiyah Mal'un ruled for 20 years. When he took authority as the Khalifa, the army that was raised against him was from the city of Kufa. As soon as he became Khalifa, the first thing you would do is that center of authority that was used against you, you would break it up. And Imam Hassan tried to protect the Shia. Imam Hassan in his treaty wrote that Muawiyah, you will not abuse, mistreat, or usurp the rights of anyone who fought against you. You're not allowed. Muawiyah signed this treaty. But as soon as he became the Khalifa, he went and he broke up all of the clans and families that were loyal to Ahlul Bayt from the city of Kufa and dispersed them around the Islamic Empire. And he brought in mercenaries, people who were loyal to the most money that could be given. The city of Kufa, though it was a stronghold of Ahlul Bayt, and afterwards it became a stronghold of Ahlul Bayt, to the extent where when a man came to our sixth Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, and he says, Assalamu alayka ya ibn Rasulullah, I'm moving and I'm leaving. He was leaving the city of Kufa. Imam Sadiq says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to move next to the Kaaba and live next to the Kaaba. Imam asks him why. He says, I want to live in a place of piety with the mu'mineen. Imam Sadiq explains, he says, the Kaaba is shrouded in mushrikeen. Stay in the city of Kufa. The Kufa is the city of our Shia. The city of Kufa till today is the city of the Shia. To the extent where we know that when our Imam comes, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, Allahumma salli ala that the headquarters of his government will be in the city of Kufa. But at that particular time, and during those 20 years, Muawiyah had taken out the Shia families, the big clans that were the supporters of Imam Ali, and moved them around. There still were some people who were loyal to Ahlul Bayt, but most of the people that were there were basically sellswords, mercenaries who had been brought in to replace and keep this garrison town occupied, but with people who would be loyal to the highest bidder. Now Muawiyah was an unjust man. So he brought them to the city of Kufa and then he didn't take care of them. So they became despondent and unhappy with the rule of Muawiyah. And they heard from the people of Kufa that there used to be a family, there used to be Ali ibn Abi Talib, who when he ruled over the city, he treated people well and we did very well. So what did they do? They started writing letters to Imam Hussein saying, hey, come back and give us authority. Make this town great again. I'm not quoting a political campaign. I'm just... Make this place amazing again. Give us wealth and status again. And they started writing letters to Imam Hussein that will support you. Why? Because they were despondent of their treatment from the previous Khalifa, and to see his son step in, they didn't like this idea. The Shia who are loyal to Imam Hussein, they numbered, according to Tabari, 4,500 still in the city of Kufa at this time. And as soon as Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad came into the city of Kufa, he started putting them in prison. During the Waqia of Karbala, over 4,500 Shia, according to Tabari in his history, were in the prisons of Kufa so that they couldn't go help Imam Hussein. According to other narrators of history, there were over 11,000 Shia who were imprisoned at this point in time who were loyal to Imam Hussein so that they couldn't go to the help of Imam Hussein. Amongst them famously Ibrahim ibn Malik Ashtar, Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, Sulaym ibn Qais, Sulaym ibn Sa'd al-Khazai. The leading companions who were the morality of the city of Kufa and who kept these sellswords in love with Ahlul Bayt had been removed from them and put into prison. There's a lesson here, by the way. You guys ready? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Us as Shia are not just responsible for ourselves. We are the morality of every environment we go into. You as a Shia, the follower of Madhab Ja'fari, need to be the best in every environment, that people look to you for the example of what is morally right and what is good. When our sixth Imam says, "Kunu zaynan lana la takunu shaynan alayna," be an adornment for us, don't be a source of disgrace for us. Imam Sadiq says, if there's a town of 10,000 people and one of our Shia live there, and anyone is better in character than our Shia, he's not our Shia. You who have the Ahlul Bayt in your life, who have guidance in your life, who know what is good and what is right, and you have the perfect example in front of you, in all of humanity, you have to be the morality that guides and leads people and stands up for justice in every instance. Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad was smart. He was evil. He was smart. He took the morality out of Kufa. He took the people who would guide them to the path of Imam Hussein and remove them from the city. And then when these mercenaries were left, he sent them to kill Imam Hussein. The people who fought Imam Hussein were not the Shia. Those who were known as the Tawabin, who came after the event, who were released from prison. Do you know when they were released? After the death of Yazid. In 61, they were imprisoned to stop them from going to Imam Hussein. They spent 3 years in prison. And when Yazid died, then they let them out and they said, okay, now what are we going to do with you? The Khalifa is dead who told us to put you in prison. You're free. And that's when the Avengers, Mukhtar, raised his army. Ibrahim ibn Malik Ashtar took over the city of Kufa, and then they went and they fought for the blood of Imam Hussein. All of these events in history led us to the fact that Imam Hussein was put in a position where he was both the absolute religious authority, and he would say it, one like me does not do bay'ah of one like him. Meaning that I have the religious superiority. And he had the political superiority because he had the rights from the treaty of Imam Hassan on his side. How do we see the victory of Imam Hussein? Look in history and you'll see up until the event of Karbala, society took both religion and politics from the Khalifa. But after the event of Karbala, no Khalifa retained the right to pass religious authorities and religious rulings upon the Muslimin. Every Khalifa after the Waqia of Karbala keeps in his court religious advisors. And the Khalifa admits, I don't have the religious authority to make these rulings. The sacrifice of Imam Hussein in the field of Karbala was something that showed the people that this man can be a king, but never believe that he has the right of religion over you. Because if you would believe that he had the right of religion over you, then how could the most religious one kill the grandson of the Prophet? How could he be a religious authority if he kills the children of Rasulullah? This event in Karbala not just for us, protected us from the influence of the khulafa and the confusion of who is the political authority and who is the religious authority. For the Shia, it became clear that anyone who stands against Ahlul Bayt has no authority anywhere and became accursed. But for all of Islam, the event of Karbala separated the Khalifa from religious authority and showed that this Khalifa is only a king and nothing else. And in many cases, even they acknowledged that this was a despot. This was someone who was evil and against the principles of Islam. Imam Hussein's fight was to protect the message of Islam from being corrupted. Otherwise, people would have continued the tradition after Muawiyah that, okay, this guy's the Khalifa, he's also the religious authority. And that whatever he says is part of the religion, whatever he does is part of the religion. But when people saw the extreme of the example, saw the absolute nature of good versus evil, and they saw that this evil man killed the family of the Prophet innocently, they said that how can we take anything of religion from this person? This person has no religious authority. All of Islam was changed and preserved because of the event of Karbala. This is why we say that Imam Hussein saved the religion of Islam. This is how. That in the minds of people, they could never accept again that the Khalifa should tell me what is wajib, what is haram, what I have to do, what I can't do in terms of my faith with God. That authority is not belonging in that seat. But the example that had to be made was an extreme example for people to understand it. The sacrifice had to be absolute. That it wasn't just that when, for example, the claim would be made that a baghi, a attacker against the Khalifa has been set down. There were people who were trying to raise a rebellion and the rebels have been put down. People might have said, yes, these were rebels who were put down, until they saw the head of a 6-month-old child raised on a spear, that they would question the fact. How is a 6-month-old child a rebel? When they would see a face like Akbar on a spear, this looks like Rasulullah. Why is his head on a spear? They would see the head of the grandson of the Prophet on a spear, reciting from the Quran. They would say, how can you say that who recites the Quran from a spear was a rebel against who? But the message of Karbala, for it to survive, for it to be able to exist, needed both sides. The sacrifice made in the field of Karbala, and then the one who taught and educated the people of the azamat of the sacrifice that was presented. That was Sayyidah Zainab. If it was not for the speeches of Sayyidah Zainab, if it was not for Sayyidah Zainab revealing the reality of what happened in Karbala, then maybe these people would have said that maybe they were rebels. But the words of Sayyidah Zainab, the masaib of Sayyidah Zainab, the attributes of Sayyidah Zainab and the Sibaya and the prisoners, told the people where haqq was. Which is why the masaib of Sayyidah Zainab, when she is called Sharikat al-Hussein, are azim. They're great. She had to go through great difficulties. The same way Imam Hussein in Karbala presented a sacrifice like no one else, Sayyidah Zainab is that lady who went through difficulties like no one else. There is some poetry that is written about the masaib of Sayyidah Zainab and what she went through, that as if she said herself, I am the one who witnessed the 2 fires. One fire that burned the door of my mother, and that other fire that was more severe, that burned our tents in the city of Karbala, in the land of Karbala. Do you understand something, how severe it was? I will give you an example if your hearts can bear it. Tonight, don't stop. Tonight we cry. They describe when the tents in Karbala were burned, one mu'arrikh writes, a woman ran out in a red chadar. Her hijab was red. When they said, who in Karbala would wear a red hijab, red scarf? They said it was Zainab al-Kubra. They said, Zainab did not know better? No. Zainab's hijab was red because when they brought the body of Akbar back to the tents, this boy she had raised with her own 2 hands, he had a hole in his chest from a spear. When Zainab threw herself on the body of Akbar, her chadar took the color of the blood of Akbar. That mother, that aunt who was mourning this boy, they burned the tent she sat in that she had to run out of. Zainab would say, I am the one who witnessed the two chests. The chest of my mother that was broken behind the door. How painful that moment was. They describe that Ali ibn Abi Talib, as he gave the ghusl to Fatima to Zahra, he cried out in pain. One even says that he left the room of ghusl and came and sat on the floor outside weeping. When Salman asked, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, you are Fatih Khaybar, you are the one who ripped the doors of Khaybar, you are the champion of Islam. Why do I see you now doing a ghusl, sitting on the floor crying? Amir al-Mu'mineen would reply, O Salman, Fatima had such wounds even I did not know about. Oh Salman, they broke her ribs when they crushed her between the door and the wall. Zainab is the one who says, I witnessed the two chests, one that of my mother that they broke, and one that of Hussein over which they ran horses. Amir al-Mu'mineen, you could not stand that they broke the ribs of Zahra. Hi Hussein, where they mixed his ribs with his backbone by running over him with horses. Zainab would be the one who would say, I am the one who witnessed the two trays. The one tray that had the liver of Hassan in it. Remember that the poison that they gave Imam Hassan was so vile that it would cause him to cough up his liver. Imam Hassan himself, when one moment he was sitting inside with his brothers, began coughing, ran out of the house coughing as blood came out. Imam Hussein followed him outside, said, brother, what happened? Imam Hassan said, I have been poisoned many times, but I have never been poisoned by such a vile poison that my liver comes out of me. Oh Hussein, look. When Imam Hassan was in his final days, he could not go outside, that they put a tray next to him, in which when he would have the urge to cough, the blood of his liver would come out and go into this tray. When Sayyidah Zainab wanted to come to the room, Imam Hassan said, cover this tray, I hear my sister coming. I don't want her to be disturbed by seeing my blood. But as soon as it was covered, Sayyidah Zainab entered the room, and her too, she is Sharikatul Hussein. She's the sister of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. She immediately knew what the brothers were hiding and saw the tray filled with her brother's blood. She says, she would call out, I am the one who witnessed the tray filled with the blood of my brother. And I witnessed the second tray that held the head of Hussein. She was the one who was there, that when they presented the head of Abu Abdullah to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, it came in a tray. She was there when they presented it to Yazid Mal'un, it was presented in a tray. She was the one who was there when Sakina wept for Abu Abdullah. They presented this tray. Remember that child who says, I did not ask you for food, I asked you for my father. What did they say? Remove the cover, child, and you will find what you are looking for. Zainab is that one who not only witnessed the liver of Hassan, but witnessed the head of Hussein. But the greatest tragedy, we would say, the one that she was protected from, is the one where she would say, I am the one who made two stands in front of the zalim. I am the one who bore patiently when I was in a state of difficulty and disgrace. One in front of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. And the second, oh, the shame that killed me as I stood in front of Yazid Mal'un. But brother, I will tell you, I went through the most difficult stations, but I did not cry in front of them. Oh brother, you fought in Karbala bravely. I fought in Kufa and Sham just as bravely. They never saw me cry in front of them, brother. I defended the truth the way you defended Islam. Hussein gave his chest. Zainab gave her chadar. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الكافرين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد، يا أعلى بحق علي، يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة، يا محسن بحق الحسن، يا قديم الإحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this ibadah to our marhumin and the mu'mineen from amongst our families, our communities, and all those who are in need of dua. Oh Allah, we have gathered here with hajat. By the right of the mention of Ali Muhammad, fulfill our hajat. Oh Allah, those amongst our families, our communities, the mu'mineen who are suffering through sickness and disease, Ya Allah, give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families and our children from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman, and entitle us to the Shafa of Imam al-Hussein in dunya and akhirah. Matam ya Hussein.
جانم فدای زینب، 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 جانم فدای زینب. O on and O Muhammad, O progeny of Ja'far, guarding Abu Abdullah, you were the sword of Haydar. We honor your shahada in this Azai Zainab. Labbaik bar zubanam, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab. From Karbala to Kufa, Kufa to Sham, Bibi, you brought a revolution with your Kalam, Bibi. Hear the reverberations from that Sadai Zainab. Labbaik bar zubanam, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab. Your piety and iman, your sheer determination, your courage and demeanor, truly an inspiration. At par with Anbiya is Sabr aur Rizai Zainab. Labbaik bar zubanam, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab. Say no to every tyrant, say la ilaha illallah. Say no to fear of dying, remember inna lillah. Calling to truth and justice is still nidai Zainab. Labbaik bar zubanam, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab, Janam fidai Zainab. جانم فدای زینب جانم فدای زینب اقرا باسم ربک Read in the name of Allah, the indigent and hungry. Feed in the name of Allah. Knowledge and empathy are what signifies Zainab. Labbaik Barzubana, Janam Fidai Zainab. Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab. Guarding the holy Rosa, we are the Shia lions, facing the evil arrows. We are the wall of iron. Until we die we will shelter Ridai Zainab. Labbaik Barzubana, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab. We are the sword of Haidar, no army can defeat us. We are the plan of Zahra, no Lucifer can beat us. Like oxygen we breathe in, Karbal Balai Zainab. Labbaik Barzubana, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab,
Janam Fidai Zainab, Janam Fidai Zainab.
Say,